Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand, and I'm joined this week by Zach Semke. How you doing, Zach?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
How's things in Seattle?
Things in Seattle are good. It's nice and sunny, and my brother and I got out on the water sailing for the first time for the season yesterday, which was really fun. Yeah, it's great.
Nice. And we've also got Jay Fox back this week. How you doing, Jay?
I'm fantastic. We've swapped weather, apparently, me and Zach, because it is stormy and gray here.
Oh, welcome to Seattle in North Carolina.
Yeah. Well, we're as we're recording, it is Anzac Day, which is a commemoration day for Australia and New Zealand, and always happens 25th of April. And this is typically the time when people start feeling the cold. This part of the world. It's when I was back selling insulation and heat pumps. This was the weekend that was known to be when the phones would start ringing, when people realized that they might need to do something about improving their houses for the coming winter. So Anzac Day weekend, as well as being a commemoration day, kind of marks the definitely the changing of the seasons, when it really starts to kick in here. So yeah, I guess things are warming up on your side of the planet.
Yes, indeed.
Seasonally, not just climatically.
No, it's been fairly normal for the season.
Yeah.
A few warm spells here or there, but we're back at average.
All right, as long as we're not talking about the political climate, we're good.
Well, yeah, no, let's not go there. I enjoyed listening to Shannon's report. We had Shannon, who will be a familiar voice to a lot of people who listen to this show. Great to hear her report from IBS, which was huge by the sound of it. Pretty amazing. Just think about the scale of that building show. So we're going to get into that. But before we do, we've got a few people to thank, Zach.
Indeed. So we want to give a big shout out to Source 2050 for being our sponsor of the week this week and making all of our programming possible here at the Passive House Accelerator, including the Passive House podcast. Also, a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thanks to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, and Solo Windows. And thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Facro, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, and Source 2050.
Awesome. All right. Now, as I mentioned, we got this week a great interview with Shannon, who went to IBS. Jay, you talked to Shannon. You do a bit of a quick overview, but for those who aren't familiar, just real high level, who is the National Association of Home Builders, and what is IBS?
Well, they are a trade group. That's the National Association of Home Builders, a very large trade group in the United States. And they put on the International Builders Show, which is really one of the largest, if not the largest, builders show in North America. I think Shannon said that there were something like 81,000 people there, which is just really, really enormous, and especially coming, I think I'd just been to Nessie, maybe the week before when we had this conversation, and Nessie drew, maybe around 1,000, 2,000, and that felt massive to me. So I can only imagine what 81,000 is like. And she mentions that they have the construction zone where she ran into fellow construction tech co-host Mark Willey, and that surprisingly air tightness was one thing that was being talked about, which is really interesting and really great, as well as electrification, which are two pretty big components of our little piece of the building environment. So yeah, that's the general scope of thing. I think she also mentioned that there's more options for everything in terms of things like mineral wool or CLT or just about any kind of building material, which is a great thing to see, and it's great that they're becoming a bit more mainstream.
Yep. Yep. Lots to cover, so let's dive in and hear Shannon's report of the NAHB IBS show.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast. My name is Jay Fox. I'm here with my co-host, Mary James. And today we are introducing Shannon Pendleton, in-house Passive House consultant for Source 2050 and principal at Sanderson Sustainable Design in beautiful New Hope, Pennsylvania. Welcome, Shannon.
Thanks for having me, Jay. Hi, Mary. Very nice to see you both.
Thanks for being here.
Well, we asked you on because it is officially conference season, and you recently went to IBS. That's a huge event. This year there were 1,800 exhibitors at IBS and over 81,000 attendees. How was the experience? Just to jump right in.
Yeah, it's big. This was my first time seeing that scale, and it's literally impossible to see all the exhibitors. So I think you probably know, like, I normally attend conferences that are focused on high performance or passive house, which tend to be a little smaller. But I was warned to wear sneakers and that I would need to use shuttles to commute from one expo hall to another. So I was prepared.
Nice. And it was in Vegas, right? So it's like, it's built for these enormous kind of conferences.
Yes. So there were 3 huge exhibit halls across a couple different buildings. There are tunnels between them that you can take driverless cars to shuttle between. Yeah, it's Vegas. It was fun.
And I just want to interject and say, so IBS stands for the International Builders Show, and it's put on by the National Association of Home Builders, which is a very large organization whose members tend to be more in the production home builders business. So as we were saying, a little different from most of the conferences that we attend.
Yeah.
But I assume that, Shannon, when you were going to visit all these exhibitors, that you were talking to them about Source 2050, yes?
Absolutely. Yeah. And going to visit a lot of the vendors that we have on Source 2050's platform to see how they were doing at their booths. Characteristically, a lot of the products and people I went to see specifically were around NAHB's construction performance zone. So that's where there were demonstration stages for hands-on instruction or high performance, methodologies, tips, tricks, presentations. And I was lucky enough to get an invite to join Mark Willey on one of those stages and present zero energy building. But the topic of passive house specifically, we had to be very careful with our language and not wear logos and things like that in order to, present properly for NAHB. But it was a great experience, and that whole area had a lot of high performance people and products around it at all times.
What were some of the products like that attendees were really kind of gravitating to, either that were, are represented on the Source 2050 platform, or just, high performance in general that kind of drew some interest?
Yeah, so I think in that area, it was really the concepts of electrification and air tightness. And I think code is driving those, or incentives are driving the interest in that, especially at the production builder level. If they have to meet something new, they have to incorporate it into their repertoire. I saw a lot more uptake in interest for those topics. But generally, all across all areas outside the performance zone, um, you could immediately tell if someone was pushing their product or their practice to elevate either efficiency or sustainability, a carbon smart material, or if they just were not interested and they wanted to stick to their knitting, right? And just kind of stay within their wheelhouse.
I guess just I'm thinking windows, because I saw a ton of window people at Nessie. Were there a lot of like high performance window exhibitors around the exhibit hall?
Yeah, there were. And my real interest is suddenly to find American made products, because some of the, not for any other reasons than we, for a lot of the projects, have to meet BABA requirements, which are Buy American requirements for some low income multifamily housing developers. And so the biggest aha moment I actually had at the conference was visiting Sierra Pacific's booth. They had a gorgeous timber frame curtain wall. And that curtain wall is, I think it's their Timberlight 2.0. So it's got shear blocks in it. It's got horizontal and vertical mullions that can snap in. And it's got Doug fir veneer over LVLs. So it's really, really beautiful. But what I didn't realize is something that a few people were discussing, which is sourcing materials, right? When they're putting them into production for their products, and how can they insulate themselves as manufacturers from, the changing environment and supply chain issues. So I didn't realize Sierra Pacific owns more land than I think any other window manufacturer, and they steward it very, very carefully. And if anyone's interested in those subjects, I think a visit to their website is well worth the time. I was very impressed.
Huh. And it's mostly US based. It's not like they don't have holdings in Canada or.
Yeah, as far as I know, all their manufacturing is in the US. I mean, a lot of I think it's like cars, there are some parts that probably come and go.
Yeah, I've
I'm guessing.
being from Detroit, I'm very familiar with how that works and how you shouldn't disrupt that, but okay.
And yeah, that's great, because window products, there are some great choices that are made in the US, but a lot of them, for a variety of reasons, a lot of the choices that are in passive house buildings are European based or Canadian based window products. So I'm sure it's a big issue for anybody, any project where they're trying to hit passive house performance targets. And
Yeah, and the BABA requirements. So, or historic requirements. Like if you want to build a high performance building in a landmark district, you're really up against a lot of challenges with windows. And, for high performance, it's one of the holy grails, right? You really can't get there without great windows. And depending upon your climate, they all have to be airtight, but, in some cases, triple pane, thermally broken. And then you get into the sustainability of what they're made out of. And most of the ones made in the US that are hitting the kind of performance levels we need to do things affordably are made of UPVC. And those extrusions that they're using to make those windows are profiles directly from Europe. So they're using those extrusions here in the States to create those profiles. And, our installers in the US, they're not used to installing European windows. So even though they're made here, they're surprising, and so it was great to see a company like Sierra Pacific that's been around so long, really just upping their game and putting forward that stewardship and that interest in the materials first.
And I'm just curious, do they have aluminum cladding for their wood frames?
They do.
Yeah, so for fire resistance, they still meet those targets.
Yep.
Great. And was Passive House a subject that came up much, or was it more when you were talking to people, they were interested in high performance, but maybe not so much Passive House?
I always bring up Passive House, so it was always part of the conversation, but there were varying degrees of excitement about it. Some folks were interested and had no knowledge, right? Some had some knowledge, some, if I recognize someone, they're usually like already an expert. But I think the reception overall was good, but I think the level of knowledge was pretty sparse.
And does that, like, for the booths as well? I mean, was there a percentage, even like, companies selling high performance products, were they really driving home the point of, oh, we're Passive House compliant, or we have a Passive House certified component, or were they kind of trying to downplay that and just be like, it's really good, the quality is really good?
I was looking for the logos, right? Because if someone's got a pre-certified component, they're usually advertising that. And some of the manufacturers had that and weren't advertising it, but if I asked, they were really ready to talk about it. Sierra Pacific being one of those. I hate to keep mentioning one name, but like I said, that was my big aha moment. But yeah, I don't think most people really know what it is still, but they do understand high performance. Being with Mark Willey, who, as you know, is construction tech co-host on Passive House Accelerator, but he also does a lot with a lot of groups, including the Build Show. So I got to follow him around with his crew, and they really are pushing high performance and zero energy. And Stephen Basic was there. He did the first core certified building with FIAS. So, the prescriptive path. So I didn't realize that. So we had a lot to talk about there. And it was neat because they did a lot of work with the much larger booths or the bigger vendors who are pushing high performance and want to talk about that. So it was wonderful to see that discussion happening, but Passive House didn't come up as a phrase, or as a brand or as a methodology. It was more the principles that were discussed: airtightness, bulk water first, air tightness next, continuous thermal insulation, energy recovery, ventilation. There was some thermal bridging discussions for sure, but yeah.
That's great that energy recovery ventilation was a topic there, because I would have guessed that that's still a pretty small niche product at a place like IBS.
Yeah, definitely. I think as many people who didn't know what Passive House was don't consider ventilation in homes. I think that's a failure of code. I really do wish it was a bigger part of the conversation, because it's such an important factor for health and safety and durability. But there were great products there.
Well, I mean, all those production home builders, I think they have to have some kind of ventilation, right? But they aren't familiar with heat recovery ventilation or energy recovery ventilation, right?
Right. And if they are, they're really looking at their known brands that they're already using, like a Panasonic or, a Mitsubishi or maybe a Braun, but most of them have not heard of a Zender, or, any of the other big names that we use in Passive House.
Yeah, so it sounds like zero energy was more of a buzzword than Passive House for sure, right?
Definitely. Zero Energy Ready Home is more of a brand that I think production builders know exists and might try to shoot for.
I saw also that the SPAN panel got voted the best energy efficiency product, which, clearly zero energy and electrification seems to be on the mind of a lot of the builders there. If that was voted as the best product. And for people who don't know what SPAN panel is, it helps. It makes it easier to go all electric, because you can sort of timeshare some of the outlets and
Do a little load shifting.
right in the
Yeah.
pan.
It automates it, right? It makes the use of going all electric a little more user friendly and gives people that interface where they have an app for that, right? And they can turn things on and off or look at wonderful schedules of how much money they're saving or turn their lights off after they leave the house, you know? I'm glad they got that. Congratulations to them. It's a great product. What I thought was also fun were, along with Span and some of the really huge manufacturers that have these insane booths. I mean, they literally build houses inside these booths and pour waterfalls onto the roof that cascade down into the, into the drains. It's incredible. It's really something to see. And there's a whole interiors world that has zero interest in a whole building approach. And I think that's really what's missing from the concept at these big shows is you're going to build a building. So there's no whole building approach. You really can't even start to talk about efficiency. But when manufacturers did stick to their knitting, what I really enjoyed seeing were the imaginative, smaller products or niche products. So like there was bark cladding or Japanese shishugiban, burned wood for heat treated structures that are more fireproof, or, CLT, cross laminated timber, connectors and fasteners, and better materials for those that are less conductive. So you can have them go through continuous installation and not have to derate them so much. Or, there were blower doors and there were really well forested woods that had great concealed fasteners for cladding, a lot of different beautiful finishing options and pattern options that were pre-made. And then a lot of products that will try to do more than one thing at once, right? So they'll integrate 3 functions into one product, much like when you have, let's say, a weather barrier that is also a vapor retarder and also has a rain screen on it, right? So you get like a 3-in-1 by using one product, which helps with labor and helps with, making your assembly maybe a little smaller. But there were a lot of ready-mades. Prefabrication was an interesting topic there. They had some pre-made saunas with sustainably forested wood. It was fun. There was a lot to learn.
Were people hopping in the sauna? Like, could you actually go in and try it out, or?
Yes, we were all
Seriously?
hopping in the sauna. It was the sauna wasn't on, and
Okay.
it was warm enough without it. But you could go inside and sit and look at the design and the mechanicals.
Yeah. And so I'm curious when you said prefab, because there was while I was in Nessie, there was a lot of, well, I should say a lot of prefab talk, and nobody like brought a whole panel in, but it seems like in Vegas it was actually big enough to do that. I mean, were they bringing in their panels and like cutting away and showing you the assembly? Like,
Yes, and one of my favorite booths was, looking at my photos here, was this masonry block, which is much bigger than a concrete masonry unit. And it's used above grade, but it's made with perlite and it's almost like a volcanic rock feeling, right? So it's much lighter, but it's also still masonry. It's still very heavy. And they had pre-made chimneys for fireplaces. And they had other pre-made walls and cross sections for our building envelopes. And they really had 2 sides. So you'd see the finished side and you could walk around the back and see all of the mechanicals and the chases and the flues and how it operated. And I think that was a good theme. A lot of the displays had cross sections so that you could see the construction of the materials. And everybody that was at the booths was really knowledgeable. There were a lot of adhesives on the floor, like Sashco. We had climate adhesive from Source 2050 there. And it was neat to see the technology changing in those, because a lot of those now are really moving toward no VOCs, no solvents, because they're coming up against foams, or they're trying to achieve goals to be non-toxic.
is there, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but like, what's kind of driving the change to go from VOCs? Like, is it code, or is it like, let's call them people who want to make a certain continent healthy again?
I don't know overall, right? But I would guess that if a company has goals to be a healthier product,
Mhm.
and what that means to them. I mean, if you're a construction worker and you're working with something that's got volatile organic compounds coming off of it, you're at a health risk and you should be wearing a respirator or in a well-ventilated area. But if you have a product that isn't off-gassing like that, you can use it anywhere.
Yeah.
And if you are wanting your product to be used in a high performance building, you're going to have to meet, in some cases, indoor air plus requirements. So, anytime you're inside that air barrier, you're messing with people's breathing and their health. So I think it's important to all those vendors. I've got to say Sashco and Sierra Pacific threw some pretty epic parties as well. And a lot of what they were talking about was workforce development and education and mentorship and
Mhm.
bringing in mentees. So I really appreciated that as well. They were leading the way there.
Yeah, and educated workforces are going to be essential to filling in the housing supply gap that we have. Was increasing housing supply a big theme there? Or was that not? I mean, obviously they're all builders, so they're addressing that, but was it something that was getting much airplay?
Not so much. I think it was brought up on the stages a little bit, and perhaps there were some summits around it or some sessions around it, but I didn't see that they had, an area allocated for it, like the construction performance zone. There wasn't an area like that defined for that topic. But that's a good idea.
Could not agree more. We need it here. Although it might catch on fire because now we're dealing with fires on the 6-month anniversary of the hurricane. But yeah, so I guess I wanted to ask about sessions. Did you get to go to any sessions, or were you mostly kind of walking around the floor? And what were some of the themes that you saw coming through in the sessions, if any?
So I did not go to any of the sessions.
Okay.
I really was focused on seeing as many vendors as I could see. I wanted to visit the ones that we have on Source 2050, but also see some of the ones we're targeting to onboard or be surprised,
Yeah.
I will say I saw something interesting from a financial perspective, which I thought was neat. And I saw this last year when I was at Nessie as well. The groups that want to finance this work, right, and either provide an easy way to get a loan or an easy way for a builder to get funding to provide that to a client, or a way to marry contractors with funding and find out if the project will meet the goals for the funding and if the funding will meet the goals for the project. So it was nice to see a little bit of that as well.
Yeah. I feel like that's a thing that's often lacking. I think we focus a lot on how to build it, not how to afford to build it, which is a necessary component.
Yeah, and I think being that far south and west, right,
Yeah.
was kind of different than being right on the coast and right near where a lot of the incentives are happening. I
Yeah.
think probably had a lot to do with what the discussions were about.
Okay. I was at Getting to Zero Forum in Charlotte last year, and that was a very similar. There was a lot of focus on how do we actually finance it, and because it just doesn't exist down in North Carolina, or they weren't sure if federal funding was going to dry up or not. So they were looking to what other states are doing, and pulling inspiration from them.
Yeah, I saw that in Texas as well.
Cool.
And what about the whole topic of embodied carbon? Was it getting much attention there?
Definitely for anyone with a wood product. I think that that language is gaining ground, and the understanding of what it means to quantify different levels of performance when you're talking about sequestering carbon and the emissions created, not just when you're using it versus using something worse, but all of the materials and transport and, procurement that go before the creation of the material and its arrival on the site. So, and that's that stewardship piece, right? It's really companies that care more. And I don't think there was a difference between whether someone was a really big vendor or a really small vendor. That was the same conversation on both sides, if it was being had, which was nice to see.
It's really cool. Yeah, they're flashing their EPDs and like,
Yeah.
I need to sit down and learn all the steps. I know them generally, but I see the big wheel and I get intimidated.
Well, you've got the cradle to gate, and then all the way through to grave, and then all the way through to cradle again, right? So like, if you're a high performance building, you're taking care of everything from the gate to the grave. I think Passive House really takes care of all of that. So we really need to get to the gate from the cradle and understand, because that's 50% of our goals now, if we're doing these high performance buildings. So it was fun to see people seeking out those materials. And like, for instance, we were in the Shishugiban Nakamoto forestry booth, and they care very much about the forest that they steward in order to procure their wood. And they had it everywhere, like in all of their literature. And I think a lot of wood-based products were like that. Bark clad was another that I had never seen. So I actually have a client we're going to do a treehouse for, and I thought, bark clad, yes. And it's real bark, and the way it's forested and harvested. And, I think cork, I saw a lot of cork as well. And thermally modified woods. And I think that's a lot of where the conversation was. The only other thing, because I'm always trying to get rid of the worst offenders, right? Steel, concrete, where's the glass made? How's it made? Where's it coming from? How far away? But then earthwork. So, you've got concrete, there's a lot of earthwork that goes along with that. So what can we do to replace that part of the pie? And what can we do to also remove the steel? And what can we use instead? So the CLT is great, but it's expensive. So can we use, a laminated engineered lumber that's less expensive? Can we use a ground screw or a pile instead of a wall for, below grade? And what can we do with earthwork around the infrastructure for sewers and water use and reusing water? Reusing water was a good theme for anyone doing any plumbing, right, products, or any kind of all-terrain sewer systems.
Makes sense for Vegas.
Yeah.
Yeah, was that another thing that kind of came up where a lot of the manufacturers based in kind of the West Coast and local to Vegas that you met, or were they? I mean, was this?
Yeah, I couldn't tell. I don't think so. It's so big. It's almost like a planet of its own. It has a gravitational pull. People came from everywhere for this, and it was very well attended. People seemed to be getting what they wanted out of it. And I think the only thing they could have improved for me was the food. I could have used some better choices. I made some unwise eating choices while I was there.
Jeanette? I figure Vegas, they'd have, everything, pull out the buffet and, all the.
Oh yeah, when we left the hall, the exhibit hall, there were endless fantastic options. But inside the exhibit hall, there were few and far between, and not exactly carbon smart, low plastic, or healthy.
This sounds like Javits Center. Every time I go to Javits, it's like, oh God, I have to eat this same like terrible sandwich for $25. It's like they don't even give you free food, which is insane.
Yeah, I looked for the aluminum cans because I've heard that that's the one thing that always gets recycled. So even if I was looking for water, I was looking for either no can or no, have my own vessel, or look for aluminum.
And so was water efficiency was a pretty big topic?
Yeah, so I did get to see some of the water reuse in porous paving, um, practices either in that paving or in plumbing technology. So that was nice to see. I'm trying to think of who else had a focus on water. Yeah, there's Pure Pave. They had the porous paving, and I can't remember the plumbing example I saw, but it was pretty great. There was also some additional mineral wool insulation providers out there, which was nice to see. Because usually, we only have an option or two out there for that. So I think more options within each category is what I was starting to see, but still not enough. We need a lot more in a lot more locations, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see any straw bale, or not straw bale, but straw insulation panels? Is
I
that
did not, but I know where I go for that already. So we're not far from Vermont where I am. So there's a couple options right around me.
Yep.
I imagine you saw some of those at Nessie.
I did. I feel like they're starting to become very common, and that might
It's the
just
new
be
SIP,
yeah,
right? It's a structural insulated panel, but instead of foam, it's straw or hay.
yeah. And it was, I feel like very recently, the first one I heard of who was like really explicitly straw was Savick up in Alberta, and now at Nessie, several people. Croft is one of them. They're up in Maine, like mid-coast Maine. There's a few in Vermont. Like, yeah, it's
New
becoming.
frameworks, Echo Cocoon. Yeah, yeah. And Echo Cocoon was the first one I'd ever heard of where they traced the source of their grown products back to regenerative farming practices. And when I learned that and got deep into soil health and understood what it meant to grow and farm that material and what it means not only to the building industry, but to food production and soil health and water retention to prevent stormwater runoff. I just gave me the solutions, all bound into one product. And I thought, what a great idea. What an honorable thing to do with your product. So my hat's off to them. And
That's
it was neat to see the combination of those kinds of products with like a hempcrete. So you could get that plaster look with a little less cementitious material.
yeah. Oh, is hempcrete kind of yeah, like hempcrete or wool or any of these other biomaterials? Did you see them floating around and starting to come into the mainstream a bit?
Yeah, a little bit. I didn't see them so much at the International Build Show, but whenever I see a straw panel, especially a SIP, I see them doing like a hempcrete or a lime plaster
Okay.
interior on those, which is a beautiful vapor open assembly. I wish I would have seen more of those at IBS.
It still cracks me up that I think the most popular Instagram post in the history of the accelerator was somebody was installing hempcrete and it just had hashtag hemp, and it's like 20 times more popular than anything else we've done. So
That's
I think
great.
people really like hemp for some reason.
I wonder what it could be. But like I said, there is no way to see all the exhibits. So apologies to anyone I missed who is doing exactly what I said I wish I could have seen. But I really enjoyed that construction performance zone. The BS and beer crew was there. And there were a lot of great hands-on presentations. And I think no matter what materials you're choosing, the idea that the way you put them together and the understanding of how they operate as an assembly within a whole building system was really amazing to have on stage all the time at the show, surrounded by products that could be used in that situation. I thought that was just brilliant.
Before we go, I just wanted to ask about fire resistance. Was that a present theme at the conference or not? Because you mentioned thermally modified wood.
Mhm.
Was that being used for decking products? Because, decks in WUI areas are big question marks still.
Yeah, your 10 steps to fireproofing or creating fire resistance in your home. That video is amazing, Mary. I learned a lot with that. And I learned what WUI is. So, but I think that conversation was an organic one and it was very present. So anyone who had had experience with or knew someone who had experience with um, the threat of fire or smoke in their home and not being able to live in or return to a home because of its destruction, that was on the front of their minds. And any thermally modified products, that was part of the conversation, was that fire resistance. And rock wool, any wool, mineral wool insulation, that's always part of the conversation. A lot of the products would have a booth with fire on it all the time. I gotta say that's definitely a fossil fuel happening all the time at the same time, which is kind of a bummer. I get it if you just show me a picture, but that
Well,
was
that's
definitely
nice.
a marketing tool and a picture that was frequent.
Um, just another one, and this is another like niche thing, but I have no idea who manufactures it, but the grates that are responsive to basically heat and kind of shut down, and so that way embers don't come into. Mary, you're gonna know the word.
Intumescent paint that are coated in intumescent paint. Yeah.
Did you see any products like that, or is that like too nerdy and niche?
I did not see them, so I can't say if they were there or not. I can only say that I did not come across them.
Okay, I always think that that's like the coolest stuff, like that little thing that you can kind of do to help.
Yeah, yeah. Any small tips and tricks and best practices um, that you can get at shows like this often make it worth going because they change your practice no matter what material you're using,
Yeah.
and they might just change a material and leave your practice alone and make it easy to achieve something. So I like the educational part was definitely the best part, and then seeing friends there.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by to talk to us about your experience there. And, I hope that Source 2050 was able to encourage people to join their platform.
Yeah, we have a long list and a lot of new contacts and friends. So thanks, Mary. Thank you, Jay.
And that was Shannon reporting back from IBS, which was a huge show, 81,000 visitors. It says here on the website from more than 100 countries. So it is a truly international show with just an incredible number of exhibitors. I struggle to picture just how physical the size of that. I've seen some big building shows in Germany. But yeah, I don't know what that even looks like, Jay.
Yeah, I can't imagine. And I'd go back to, I used to do these shows at Javits in New York City. And I don't think even, as big as Javits Center is, I don't think they ever even got close to 81,000. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
massive.
Zach, you would have been to a few conferences and a few big building shows. What were your thoughts?
Well, I have not been to IBS, so I haven't experienced that. The largest show I think I've been to is JLC Live. I went to that show many years ago in Portland when there was a little high performance building, a sort of passive house kind of stage that was happening within that. And I mean, it was really fun to hear Shannon's report and hear a little bit about some of the new products that are happening, and also a reminder of the niche that we operate in. And,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
always a little sobering. That said, and we were talking about this before we started recording. In the U.S., we have this patchwork of building codes in different states, and some states are very progressive, like Massachusetts and Washington State here, the state I live in, and others are not, and maybe even don't. I think that there's at least one or two examples of states that don't even have building code. So there's a really huge range that this industry is operating in. So while Passive House itself it remains probably a little niche, or is niche, although it's changing in Massachusetts.
Very true.
There is, there are places where home builders are needing to comply with code that is doing a pretty good job. So
Yeah.
it's a mixed bag. It's cool to see also what BS and Beer is doing and the Build Show is doing to help make inroads, or just explore high performance building in this kind of more mainstream milieu.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a bit of I felt like it was a bit of a reality check, just hearing how small the world that Shannon and us are in, and realize the scale, I guess, of the rest of the industry. I guess on the flip side, there's interest in carbon, low carbon seemed to come up, zero energy seemed to be talked about, and there are sort of these other terms adjacent to higher performance, particularly around energy, maybe around resilience. Really interesting about people trying to set things on fire, or have showing that fire resilience is quite a big thing. So I think there are these other things that people are conscious of, and it's quite useful for us to think about that in the ways that we can market Passive House and talk about Passive House that's relevant to a bigger audience. And I was working on something just last week where a home owner survey was recently done, a quite regular survey, and the most recent results from that, we were having a bit of a laugh in the office. So there's things like main bedrooms that have an attached bathroom is one of the key, is one of the most important things that people want in their home, as well as a double garage. And we were just, oh my God, what do we do with this? We're trying to talk about air tightness and ventilation, and what people really want is an extra bathroom. So,
Yeah.
where do we go with that? But I think it's a matter of finding what those motivations are, and it's things like resilience and energy and zero carbon that we can tap into and say, hey, we've got a solution for that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I have to share a little bit of skepticism around the embodied carbon piece, because I think that the wood products industry can use that potentially for greenwashing.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we have players that aren't doing that are really
Yeah.
leading the way, like Timber HP and Eco Cocoon and Savic, and like all, the players, New Frameworks.
And straw came up, like you
Right,
mentioned,
and
straw
Yeah.
and
but
hempcrete.
right. I think that we need to be like savvy consumers around, just because it's wood doesn't mean that it is good. It
Yeah.
needs to be like
Totally.
and it's super convenient for the wood products industry to be like, oh, embodied carbon, yeah, that's totally what we are. We're low embodied carbon, and that may,
Yeah.
just really depends on what the practices are. So, I think that fortunately, we have lots of great leaders and folks who are working to dial that in with wood, and also, of course, with straw.
Yeah. And I would point out, this is going back to a magazine from a bit ago, but Ari Moss of RMI wrote an article for us on the Accelerator site called "What is Good Wood?" that covers exactly that, because he says that there is, it can be easy to just assume that if it's wood, it's sustainable, but that is not always true.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and Lloyd Alter's written quite extensively on that issue about mass timber and how circularity and concepts around that as well, and end of life. But I think coming back to your point, Zach, that's the opportunity that we have in this space, because we do have a lot of really good people who have done a lot of that work, and we have data. We have people who are crunching the numbers, and I think the positive thing is at this stage, people in this broader market are starting to talk about these things and starting to ask questions. There's a lot of people in passive house space that are starting to dive into those issues and are able to provide some of the answers. So I think there's the opportunity, as you say, to highlight some of these issues around greenwashing or misconceptions of things, and to set people straight and say, well, we've actually looked into this, and this is what it looks like at the moment, or in this particular context. Because the other important part, I think, is that there isn't one right answer for any particular building or even any particular material. But it's more the process of doing a life cycle assessment, or actually crunching the numbers for that particular product, the particular systems, and how they're being used on a particular building project. And we have people that can do that. So I think that's the opportunity that we have to engage with the broader market on some of this stuff.
Yeah, well said.
The other thing that popped out for me was there was a mention of a fierce core project that Shannon
Right, Stephen
mentioned.
Basic. Yeah.
Yeah, and that people, I'm sure a lot of people will be familiar, but that's kind of an evolving space. Fierce core. That's the checklist methodology. Is that correct?
Theus Corp prescriptive specifically.
Prescriptive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's cool to hear about that, and just picking up on the straw stuff and the hempcrete. It is kind of cool to hear about some of that prefab stuff making through. But again, that whole prefab world, I think, also is similar to what you're saying, Zach. That there's a lot of misconception about that as well, and I think you picked up on that, Jay. That there's prefab and then there's prefab, and often it gets talked about, and when you look into it, it's maybe not what it was, fully dressed up as being.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, again, coming from Nessie, I mean, there's so many of these great prefab companies in the Northeast right now, Croft and New Frameworks, and I'm gonna kick myself for Geologic, that are really, walking the walk and talking the talk, and like they are, using local products. They're everything is, from wood, from straw, and just doing a really, really great job making, exactly what they said they're making. There's no, kind of bait and switch. And I think that that's just incredible. And it's taken some of these companies 20 years to get there and to really, work out all the kinks, but like it's definitely taking off. I mean, even in the 5 years that I've been in this industry, it went from being extremely niche to, I mean, Savic, I think I hadn't even heard about, using straw insulation. And now it's like, Chris Magwood put out the report, and there's like 30 companies that he mentioned in it. So it's really cool how quickly it's kind of taken off.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, I hats off to Shannon and the team at Source 2050 as well. I think it's really cool to get into this, I guess we can call it mainstream world. The market, to be conscious of that, and because it's very easy for us to be in a bit of that bubble of the small sector that we're in.
Yes.
And it is quite important to put that into perspective of the whole market and the bigger picture, which is what they are done have done by being there. So really, I think that's quite healthy to look at that and see where we currently sit in, but also to see what's the potential how we can influence that wider market and see what's pushing buttons for them at the moment too.
Yeah, and it's a really, I mean, it's a really well-designed site, really user-friendly. Not to plug it too hard, but yeah, Source 2050 is it's very easy to find what you're looking for, and whoever designed it, probably Andy, thumbs up, because
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
really great site.
Well, that's a really good point. That is a great place if you are looking for those products for your passive house building. But that's the whole point of it. But
Yeah.
the team there have done the legwork. They've gone around and looked at all those products and made it really easy to find what you need for a really great end result. So definitely check that out. Source 2050, and thanks to them for being sponsor of this week. Really appreciate that. Zach, what have we got coming over up at the accelerator and at Reimagine?
Well, you mentioned Lloyd Alter in the conversation around circularity. We are having Lloyd Alter present at Passive House Accelerator Live this week, Wednesday, April 30th. It's the fifth Wednesday of the month. So when we have a fifth Wednesday of the month, we do something special on the show. And so this special event will be focused on exploring abundance and sufficiency in passive house design by Lloyd. And Lloyd has written a lot about sufficiency and also more recently about abundance, partly in response to Ezra Klein's book, which he is very critical of and I love. So it'll be a very entertaining conversation. I'm looking forward to asking some questions myself of Lloyd. It'll be great.
Nice.
And then on the collective, we have a whole bunch of great Ask Me Anything sessions coming up in the month of May from folks like Ed May and Nikita Reed, Bev Craig, Elisa White, and many more. So definitely check those out. And we've been doing these special episodes of the Passive House podcast called The Reimagine Edit, which take little excerpts and snippets from these sessions that we're having in the collective, and we share them out in a kind of a curated ensemble of insights. So that's been really fun too. So you get a little taste, but if you want to ask your questions directly of these experts, you can join the collective, which we would love, of course. And the big news is we have Reimagine Buildings 25, Past, Present, Future, coming up on June 12th. And this is our big global conference. This conference, this time, the format will be three sessions that happen sequentially over the course of one day. And so we'll have a 4-hour chunk about past, which was focused on exploring transformative projects that are revitalizing and repurposing our existing building stock. And then we'll have a session called Present, where we'll celebrate groundbreaking designs that are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the built environment. And then we'll do a session on Future, which will dive into next-gen materials, low embodied carbon materials, cutting-edge technologies, and the future of resilient climate positive buildings. So we've got the really incredible roster of speakers lined up. Kim Davis, our programs manager, is putting together a brilliant program, as she always does. And we're really looking forward to this. And also for folks who aren't members of the Reimagine Buildings Collective. So if you're a member of the Reimagine Buildings Collective, you get complimentary access to our conferences like this. If you're not a member of the collective and you join us for the conference, you'll get a 2-month free pass to the collective that will start on the day of the conference, and we're going to have a whole bunch of programming that's inspired and kind of follows up on the conference in the collective that you'll have access to. So that's a new addition that we're able to make this year, and we're pretty excited about it.
That sounds like a pretty good deal.
Yeah,
indeed, it's a bargain, I will say. So if you're curious about all this, you can go to passivehouseaccelerator.com to get information about the conference. And if you're wanting to join the collective now, please do reimaginebuildings.com.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you, Jay, for joining us this week. Thank you to Shannon as well for doing the hard yards at IBS, and we'll be back again next week on the Passive House Podcast.